What's up YouTube, welcome back. I have another hard SQL interview question for you. This one's part of StrataScratch Advanced SQL 25, which is a list of only hard problems. I'm going through all of them. This one's company tagged for Apple and Microsoft. Let's get into it. Now this one's called new and existing users. As I said, it's company tagged for Apple and Microsoft, but also IBM, and of course it's hard. Our task is to calculate the share of new and existing users for each month in the table. Output the month, share of new users, and share of existing users as a ratio. New users are defined as users who started using services in the current month. There is no usage history in previous month. Existing users are users who used services in current month, but they also used services in any previous month. Assume that the dates are all from the year 2020, and as a hint, users are contained in the user ID column. Speaking of columns, let's take a look at the example data. We only have one table called fact events. Let's preview that. It has an ID just for the row, it seems like. We have a time ID, we have a user ID. We also have a customer ID for the name of the customer actually. We have a client ID, event type, and an event ID. But we were told users are contained in the user ID column, so that's what we're probably concerned with, along with that timestamp called time ID here, which is a weird way to call the date, but apparently that's what it is. So let's make sense of the question here. Maybe let's also take a look at the expected output. So we are expected to give for each month, this is February, March, and April of 2020, the share of new users and the share of existing users. And a new user is someone who just started using the service for the first time in that month. So to translate that, in February, 100% of users were new users and 0% were existing users because apparently the service started going live in February. So there's no usage history before that. And in March, things were looking different. We had more returning users. The share of existing users is 71%. And it got even higher in April where it was 86%. So you can sort of see things ramping up in terms of existing users, and everyone was new in February. So we want to replicate that with our input table, which is just a record of whenever someone used the service or the app. So let's think about how to do that. So we want to end up with an overview for each month, share of new users and share of existing users. How do we tell whether someone is a new user if it's their first login? So in order to get that, I think we need to divide this into a couple of steps. So how do we identify new users? Check when they first signed in. And then we want to count for every month, how many new users do we have? How many existing? So maybe let's just start with the basics of finding out when users first logged in and then build it from there, because that is what lets us identify when there were new users versus when they were existing users. Thinking of existing users, we could sort of check in, and once we sort of get a number for existing users, we can check in whether we have an entry where the user signed in before. We can basically come back to the first sign-in date or first usage date and do it that way. But there's one trick to make it even easier. Maybe you already sort of figured it out. If you look at the share of new users and share and existing users, it always adds up to 1. So we have 29%, 71%, because by definition, if someone is a new user, they can't be a returning user or existing user. If they are an existing user, that means they are not a new user. So we actually only have to calculate one of those two, and then we can get the other one by just using the inverse, or take 1 minus that value and then get that value. So that makes it a whole lot easier. I think we have all the parts. We just need to make sense of it and bring it all together. So I'll start by getting the first usage date for each user. As I said, this will be pretty simple. I'm using CTE here to sort of structure everything because there's sort of steps to this, and that just helps keep an overview. So I'm gonna select user ID, let's go user ID here, and then the minimum time ID, which is the date, and that could be their first login date. Since we're concerned with the month only here and not the specific date, we can actually just take the month of that date directly. So I'm going to extract the month from this time ID column here and call that M for month. And then I'm selecting that from our only table fact events. And I'll have to group by the first column to get the minimum login date for each minimum login month for each user. I'm just going to run that part just to show you what it does. So we get a user ID and when they first logged in, which is very nice. So the reason I did that is because I want to find out when everyone had their first usage month. I do have that here, but I sort of want to get the same overview, similar overview compared to the output. So I want to know how many people had their first month in February and in March and in April. Now I just have the first month for each user, but I don't have that aggregation, how many users for each month. So that's what I'm trying to get now. I'm going to just write another CTE, first usage overall, not per user. And I'm going to use the CTE, that table I just created, and pretty much just do another group by and aggregation to get it into the right format. So I'm going to select the month from up here, and then I'm going to count users for that month, count distinct user ID, call that user count from this CTE up here. Autocomplete works very well in StrataScratch, by the way. It's very easy to sort of go through it, not have typos. And it's going to be another simple group by one. So yeah, very easy up to here. I just checked when was everyone's first login month, and then I'm going to count up based on that table, how many new users did I have in each month. So yeah, if I wanted to only run that part, I'm sort of relating to that CDE, so I can just mark that and do it. I could do select star from first usage to do that. And yeah, it's going to give me the month as well as how many new users we had, which is, yeah, we're getting there, I'd say. So now the only thing missing really is how many users did we have in general in that month, and then we can get the share of new users. The share of new users is the amount of new users divided by the amount of all users. So I'm going to write another simple CTE called general usage, and this one will just calculate how many users did we have in each month. So I'm going to do the same extract method here, month from time ID. I like to use extract because it works in pretty much every SQL dialect, but you could do whatever you want. You could use date part or just trim the characters to get the month number. But this one just seems easiest for me, and it also works with the year and date and all that. So I'm using that a lot. And yeah, it also just really very much tells you what it does if you write it out, which is nice. So I'm going to count users here, as I said, just in general, not for the first month of a user. Also call that user count. And this time I'm selecting from the base table because I want just anyone who used the app in any month, not being their first usage. Also need to group by one, just as I did before. And yeah, this will give me the same overview of month and amount of users, but it's taking all users. Yeah, I think now we have all the parts to connect everything. Actually, as I said, we just need to divide the user count of new users by all users. We have both of that here. So I'm just going to join these two tables, first usage and general usage, and then do that calculation, calculate that metric for the share of new users. And then, as I said, the share of existing users is just the inverse. So I'm going to take 1 minus this metric for new users, the share of new users, and I'll get the share of existing users, and that'll be it. So stick with me while I just sort of finish this up. So I'm going to take the month. I need to specify one of the tables. I'm going to take first usage, to get the month. I'm also going to group by that later on. But in order to get that count, or that share, I want to take the user count of new users and divide it by the count of general users or users. And that will give me the share of new users, and that will do the trick. Now, whenever you do division using integers and you want to get like a percentage of float number, I think the easiest thing is just to multiply by 1.0, one of the numbers, to make it a floating point number in order for it to, use digits after the 0 floating points, actually represent the number correctly. You might have run into this issue before where it just gives you 1 or 0 because it just rounds to an integer, but we want to make this floating point number. So that has always been the easiest and shortest way for me to do that. And in order to get the share of existing users, I'm just like literally going to take a 1 minus. Let's copy that, put it into parentheses to make sure this gets calculated first, and just structure it a bit better. And this will be the share of existing users. Yeah, we're selecting that from first usage and we're joining general users. So we're using those two and we're just joining on the month being the same. Let's see, I mentioned I'd have to group by. I actually don't have to group by, things are already aggregated. These tables are already an overview of month and then the user count, so I don't have to group by anything here actually. I do want to order by the month. It seems to be in the correct format already because the order seems to be ordered by date, but I'm going to order by the first column in ascending order, which is default, and it'll give me the shortest month, the lowest month first. So it'll be in chronological order. It's nice. So let's run that and then zoom out to see the entire code, check for any typos I might have. Doesn't seem like there are any. I'm going to run this again. It is accepted. Solved this one before as a sort of like tried this one. But yeah, I'm going to zoom out a bit to show you the entire solution maybe. Yeah, so as you can see, we were able to solve this. It seems quite easily, but you sort of have to recognize the steps to get there. I think what helps me is thinking about the definition of the problem, reading through it, and then understanding what the definition is. And then if you think about it, the steps that make up the definition are usually the steps you have to take in SQL to get it into working code and a working solution. So in this case, it sort of defines what a new user is. It's basically when they first started using the surveys, and that is what we looked up then. So we looked at when did they first use the service. Then we wanted to take this into month. They're always talking about month in the question. So we did the first usage for each month. And then it basically says the share of new users, or maybe you have to sort of infer that a bit. The share of new users is of course the amount of new users divided by all users. And then I think, you just have to look out that, or think about the definition to realize that the share of existing users is the inverse of the share of new users, and you only have to calculate one. Yes, and that makes that question seem quite easy, but you sort of have to understand, realize what's going on, and be confident enough to put it into code. But yeah, let me know how you found this question. I think it's a good one, combines a lot of things. The question sort of makes sense. I think for a couple of these hard questions, it's just edge cases and unrealistic scenarios, but this one seems quite realistic and something you don't usually run into for other questions. So I like this one, give it a like, and yeah, that'll be it for this one. We're going to go through all of StrataScratch Advanced SQL 25, which are all hard questions. They're going to get harder than this one. And yeah, you can give this want to try along with the other ones, I'll link the playlist, and I already have some video solutions for some of the questions in the list. You can refer back to these, try the ones we haven't covered on the channel yet, and I'll leave a link to both that study list on StrataScratch as well as this problem for you to give them a try. That'll be it for today. I'll see you in another video. Thank you for stopping by.